Yo, what up, what up, what up? Welcome back to Pnoid News. Man, listen. All right, I'm gonna tell you what, we got a video today that I done woke up and I was laying in bed just kind of like, ugh, I had a long night last night. Long night last night at work. And I'll be real, I was standing here and I watched this What If Alters video today, and I was like, you know what, man? This is kind of one of those that I think that maybe, just maybe, you know what I'm saying, all part of the internet can add some things to, because we've been searching for truth about these type of issues, right? About why are people so unhappy in the modern world. And I'll be honest with you, you know what I mean? Like, I have maybe some information that this individual doesn't have, right? And the reason why I think that is because we've been standing here kind of sorting these things out a little bit. So we're going to watch this, react to it. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to chime in, you know what I mean, when it's time to chime in. Let's get to it. All right? Peace.
Series of important realizations came to me. The first of which is that although being in the trail really sucked, I was happier than I was beforehand. I went on the Appalachian Trail since I was tired of school and needed a break before I went back into the thick of society. And for all the leeches, mosquitoes, backbreaking exercise, and loneliness, I did prefer it to school.
Yo, let me keep it a buck, all right? You know me, I'm an Appalachian mud gorilla, all right? Believe it or not, me, I'm both from Pennsylvania. I've been on the same parts of the Appalachian Trail that he has, and I completely feel you. There's nothing quite like just going out and, you know, spending the day out in the woods and enjoying yourself. There's something to be said for standing here and doing things that your great-great-grandparents did and moving the way that they did, and being on a piece of land on not the Appalachian Trail, because like everybody goes on that. There's just far too many hipsters that go and, you know, go on the trail. I like to go out in the river and go on these islands that there's no footprints, there's no garbage, you know what I'm saying? There's no signs of human life, right? And it's amazing because like you're the first person who has, you know what I mean, been on this piece of ground in a very long time. And it's awesome because like you have that opportunity to really have a chance to explore the world in a different way. And the individuals who go and, you know what I mean, do these type of things and be out in the river, you end up having the opportunity to like have a camaraderie with them that you don't have with other people. It's kind of like back in the day when you got into a fight with somebody in school, or you got in a fight with somebody in the street, and then you and him turned into best friends because like everybody else was too scared to throw a punch, right? But y'all weren't. So like you had a weird shared moment of reality. You know what I mean? But let's keep rocking.
Although it's not useful and or intelligent for me to put my experience as central to the human race, this sort of burnout and feeling of disconnect from a materially wealthy world is pretty common. The modern world gives us far more of anything physically than any of our ancestors, except perhaps our parents got. The signs of unhappiness are everywhere. Look at music, art, politics, rent prices, inflation, and the list could go on. I challenge you to find a single form of human expression that's generally happy now. Songs are all about breakups, art is at how terrible the current political regime is, politics basically screams at the other side in discontent, and ideologies are literally based on what amounts to original sin now. This video exists to look at why people are unhappy, what are the causes and the results. So buckle up for a journey across modern civilization and the structures of our lives themselves.
By the way, man, like legitimately, I've always liked this dude's content. Believe it or not, like, yo, I ended up, we did those videos on Peter Zehan a couple of years back or whatever. And legitimately, like, yo, when he came out and was talking about, you know what I mean, disunited nations, you know what I mean, and reading his books and things of this nature and bringing his ideologies to the fore, I was like, yo, look at this dude. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not alone out here. Like, yo, I'll be honest with you, though. It tends to be how it works. Like, I do something, and then, like, a while later, somebody else starts doing it, and it becomes popular. It's the story of my YouTube channel. Like, yo, it is what it is. But anyway, you know what I mean? Like, yo, me and TK is probably going to really enjoy this video, you know. TK Mao, he always pops his videos into my joint. I'm like, bro, I already watched that. Like, why are you showing me this? You know what I'm saying? So, like, understand, like, this is not a diss video. This is not anything of this nature. You know what I mean? Like, I'm hoping that this guy's open for a conversation. You know what I mean? Because it would be awesome if we could go back and forth a little bit on this.
One of my intellectual pet peeves is when people complain about modern society without any reference to the rest of the world or history. I find critiques of capitalism and rationality, or in the broadest terms, modern society, that don't look at how people have lived.
Yo, was that dude just getting peed on by a cow? Yo, hold up. Hang on, man. Hold up a second.
People complain about modern society without any reference to the rest of the world or history. I find critiques of capitalism and rationality, or in the
Yo, my man's getting peed on by a cow. There's a naked black kid getting peed on by a cow. Yo, man. Yo, you shouldn't be getting peed on by a cow. Let me keep this all the way 100 there, buddy. You know what I mean? Just as an that is fucking disgusting. Like, let's keep going.
the broadest terms, modern society, that don't look at how people have lived for the vast majority of history ridiculous, given that you need real-world references to understand anything. This brings me to a fascinating documentary I was watching called Tribal Odyssey Rites of Passage that talks about how tribal peoples live around the world today, and how their tribal cultures deal with the same basic human emotions that we do in very different ways. They look at everyone ranging from the Dinka of South Sudan, the Walan.
You know, we've had this conversation before on my channel, right? Legitimately, we've had this conversation where we go, you know, man, the individuals in Africa ain't over there murdering themselves. Right? Like there's not dudes out here in the Serengeti, you know what I'm saying, with an AK-47 and a death stare, you know what I mean, that are like, you know, murking themselves out. Like, yo, they got things to do. They got a whole plan and an agenda, right? And I really do feel like the way that we deal with our depression and our mentalities are completely wrong as men, right? And like, because I've never thought about killing myself. Like, it's never been a thought that's passed through my head. Like, I got 7 kids, 5 different babies' moms. You know, I've been to jail, right? I've never in my life thought about killing myself, ever, right? It's never something that's even like remotely crossed my mind because it's not in my culture. It's not in my heritage. It's not something that comes to me, right? It's just not in me as a man, right? And I think that it's all about your heritage, your culture, how you and your peoples perceive the world. I think that's something that, you know, I mean, like we need to have a conversation about as white people in general, because I don't know, I just find it odd as a whole. Let's keep rocking though.
Of Papua New Guinea or the Hamar of Ethiopia. I was able to watch this on Magellan, a documentary streaming service home to the richest and most varied history content anywhere. They have stuff ranging from anthropology, science, music, folklore, history, modern geopolitics, and basically anything else you'd want to learn about. It's compatible with almost all devices and also is 4K without additional cost. Start learning about whatever inspires you on Magellan TV today. There are 2 things that I think we should give a little more than a passing thought to before I get to the reasons for why I think people are unhappy. The first of which is, although we can't tell exactly whether people were happy across history since there weren't scientific surveys in the 13th century, even if they did have them, I wouldn't trust the results. However, you can use several proxies from cultures to generally figure out how happy people are. Take, for example, the 14th century, which I think was pretty objectively an unhappy century. In the first half, Europe became intensely overpopulated and racked by incredible inequality. People were starving and the papacy was divided in 3. Then the Black Death wiped out half of the continent's population. Art and culture in the 14th century went from, whoa, believing this must be the end of the world due to the forces of Satan and corruption winning before the Black Death, to afterwards being horrifically nihilistic and traumatized from watching half of their friends die. The 15th century that came afterwards was much happier. Having Europe's population meant that the people who were left were much wealthier, and the society that formed afterwards was healthier, less corrupt, and less unequal.
Yeah, and this is what I keep trying to say about America, right? Like, and people go, man, like, oh, you know, why should we treat immigrants badly? Why should we just not help them? And da-da-da-da. And I'm like, yo, look, because, like, if we just let our population decline, because it's gonna, right? As old people die off and houses come empty and you have the opportunity to gain a decent lifestyle and have the chance to compete in the world and actually, you know, like unionize and have the opportunity to like gain wage growth and things of this nature and get a better share of the economy as a whole, right, the entire country will become better. But first, we have to close the borders. Like, legitimately, we need to close the borders, right? And stop letting other people in here and stop letting corporations dictate, the policy. And we'll get into this a little bit more here in a little bit. Like, it's, it's crazy how the system works. We're gonna get into it, though.
The Italian Renaissance showed a gaiety and love of life. Art was extremely bright, and humanism, or belief of the importance of living in this life pleasantly, rather than fear of hellfire, was dominant. Similarly, what got me thinking of this whole topic was when I was on the Appalachian Trail and walking hundreds of miles, I compared my experience to my ancestors in the 19th century. My mother's side is of British extraction and came to America during the colonial era, and then walked from the east coast to the heart of the continent. I thought about how their lives were significantly harder than mine. I walked about 600 miles on the Appalachian Trail and felt dead. The distance people walked on the Oregon Trail was significantly more than that. After that, they had to clear massive forests and set up homesteads with no help. The funny thing is that while America was doing these really tough tasks, that the country was for the most part happy. The mid-19th century was an era of great jubilation in Anglo-America, in which every aspect of the culture gloried in America's greatness. There was immense patriotic pride about the American mission, and you don't see any complaining. If you read presidential candidacies from the 1870s, for example, they argued over stuff as petty as several 10,000 Chinese immigrants and minor diplomatic statements with Britain. This was not a society under immense stress, to say the least. The second main point is that today the whole world seems unhappy. It's shocking to see how common the effects of this disease are. Speaking purely anecdotally from my experience in traveling or talking to friends, the Chinese, for example, seem far unhappier than Westerners, and Europeans and Indians seem at roughly the same degree of unhappiness as Americans. The happiest parts of the world I've dealt with.
All right, hang on a second, right? Because, he said Indians feel the same as Americans. But the U.S. is at 70, right? And India is at 38, 7.0 or 3.8. I'm not sure, right? Either way it goes, are two way different colors. And I kind of wanted to put that in there, right? Because I'll be honest, this part of the video right here, I was looking at it and I'm sitting here and I'm going, man, listen, this kind of don't make any sense, right? In the end of the day, when you're looking at this, right? I know you probably won't be able to see the bottom of this because it cuts it off or whatever on OBS, and it is what it is. But this is kind of, I don't know, I was kind of wondering about this. If I can get some clarification on this one here, just in general. Just a question.
With their Latin America, but that could be colored by me hanging out in the nouveau riche parts of the region that just pulled themselves out of poverty. Similarly, this is sort of played out in statistics imperfectly. For example, I would say most North Americans are unhappy with key aspects of their lives and societies. However, they're pretty happy by world standards. Similarly, I would say countries like Denmark and Finland come up very high in happiness, but if you deal with those countries at all or look at their suicide rates, you know that's not the case. It's just that in Scandinavian countries, answering that you're not happy is extremely socially loaded. These are countries where if you have a minimum or decent standard of living, you have to say you're happy to not drag the rest of the community down. Although this is an incredibly imprecise science, scratch that, this isn't science, this is just me making guesses. There are clearly complex, not easy to understand variables at work here. Let's try to figure out what they are. Reason 1. Economic stagnation. This is the easiest to understand answer. In most developed countries, the standard of living has decayed or more commonly declined by most statistics since the 1970s. This is for a series of complex reasons, mostly due to demographics that I have a bunch of videos of talking about. In the US, for example, standard wages have kept still, but the cost of living, especially in stuff like education, housing, healthcare, and the like, has risen exponentially. A perfect example of this coming out of pop culture is Homer Simpson, who in the 1980s was a lower than average loser. However, 40 years later, Homer has a lifestyle that's out of reach for most millennial Americans. He's a homeowner, his wife doesn't work, he can take vacations, he has 3 kids and a stable job. Homer was originally meant to be working class, but now his social class really doesn't exist anymore. This isn't just the case in the first world either, to be fair. In places like
that's really true. You know what I'm saying? When I saw that, I was like, that is really fucking crazy. Legitimately. But then again, as I was coming up, I grew up in Harrisburg and he grew up in Philly, right? And if you live on the East Coast, and you're working class or you're lower, lower working class, whatever it is, right? You're lower middle class or in poverty, really, kind of where we were. Like, we were always surprised when we saw somebody that had a house that wasn't attached to someone else's, right? Because, like, that was just how you lived as a kid. You know what I mean? Like, you thought if somebody had a house that wasn't attached to someone's, like, that was the richest person in the neighborhood, right? Or like they were millionaires or some shit. They were like far beyond where you were. And that was back in like the 80s and 90s. You know what I mean? Like, in the end of the day, you know what I mean? Because, like, I'm a late Gen X or earlier millennial. You know what I mean? In the end of the day, you know what I mean? Because I don't really like putting that label of millennial on myself because, yeah, I don't like avocado toast. Let's keep rocking though.
India, we see massive class bifurcations between a lower class that's seen stagnation due to globalization and an educated class that's seen all the progress. Even among this class, unemployment stalks large parts of the population, which is why my videos in India have so many views. In China, although GDP per capita has risen precipitously, a lot of it gets sucked up into cost of living. The average urban Chinese lives in a crowded apartment the size of a horse stall and has little social connection. It's very telling that a good Chinese friend of mine once told me that 996 is often a fine standard of living. For those that don't know, 996
Wait, I'm gonna let him finish the statement.
means 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week.
Let me keep this honest with you. All right, when I was probably 18 to like 34, 35, even today, like last night I put in 12 hours. Like that's normal for like working class Americans. No, I'm saying that's not normal for like, city dwelling folk, I guess. I don't know, right? But like legitimately working 12 hours a day is just normal. Right, that's a normal. Like when I was working at the mill, it was 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. one week, and then 6 to 2 on Saturday, and then 6 to 2 on Sunday, and then the next week it was 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. Right, and then you would work 2 to 10 on Saturday. Right, that was just normal. Right, and we loved it. Legitimately, like, we ate well, I mean? Like, I had a house, I had a car, I had a house, I had a truck, I had a boat, I had a hot rod, like, that was normal, right? That's normal working standards in America. Like, I don't understand like where this mentality comes from of, standing here, like, not grinding it out 12 hours a day. Like, that's just normal in general as a normal thing. Right. The 8-hour workday is basically something that came along in the 1920s and really didn't last very long because I don't know many people at all that only work 8 hours a day unless you work for like the government. Right. Like, if you have a regular job, you're putting in more than 8 hours. Like you're never going to climb out of the ooze unless you work more than 8 hours a day in America. Like, that's just how it works. 9 to 5 ain't going to cut it. I mean, to be honest, I don't know anybody that works 9 to 5.
His cousin works the same but until midnight. In China, they have the lie-down movement, where young Chinese remove themselves from society and work and live at the bare minimum since they just can't take the stress of the society they're born into. I'm not going to go into too much detail about this here, and so nothing I'd say is new, since I've talked about so many of the statistical and demographic causes.
Seriously, go watch his videos. I'm going to put a link in the description to his channel. I'm saying? Legitimately, or I'll put a link in the description to this video. Go to his channel, sub, and watch all his fucking videos. They are all really good. Really, really good.
Causes of this in previous videos. Watch those videos for more details. Number 2, we can't keep up with technological progress. The second answer is that we just went through one of the greatest technological revolutions in history with the information revolution and are still living through the results. I'm Gen Z, and seeing this latest batch of kids play with iPads more than Legos still shocks me. The information revolution did a lot of good. It allows my job to exist, for example, and it allowed me to write this episode since I just Uber-eated dinner rather than just having to pick up or cook food. Also, about 4/5 of my friend group now indirectly comes from the internet.
We talk about this on my channel a lot. Well, actually probably not as much as we should, but like legitimately there's pride that you take in what you cook and your culture, right? And this is something that like, I speak about culture a lot on my channel, right? Because I think it's what saves you from all the bullshit in the end of the day, right? I think your culture, your, you know what I mean, your heritage, your things that you do that, you know what I mean, you take pride in, you enjoy, right? For instance, you know, like I'm gonna sit here and I'll make some rigatoni here in a little bit, right? You know what I mean? I know I'm a diabetic. I shouldn't be eating pasta. I got your mentalities, but I'll be real. I'm nicking right now. I need some pasta and some, you know, some sauce, right? And I'll be honest with you, you know what I mean? Like sitting there cutting up the onions, you know what I mean? Cloving down, you know what I mean? Cloving the garlic or whatever, you know what I mean? Sitting here and, you know what I mean? Taking your time to do it properly and making stuff the way it's supposed to be made is, it's important in your life as a whole. You know what I mean? It really is.
Our societies haven't been able to deal with the massive social shifts that have come with mass information yet. The biggest factor here is loneliness and lack of human connection. This started actually with the rise of television after World War II, and now the average American spends half of their time watching television and 11% socializing. The problem with this technology is that it hacks into dopamine sectors in our brain to provide short-term pleasure while leaving us in the long term unfulfilled. It's not a gift that keeps on giving, keeps us leaving depressed, crappy, and lonely. This software is literally designed to be addicting, and
well, let me keep it a buck with you, right? Like your phone, I grew up without, you know what I mean, the internet, without, you know what I mean, computers, without cell phones. So like, I guess like I'm remotely immune to this, you know what I mean? Like I still, you know, I'm still on my phone like all the time, but it's not like being on social media sites or, you know what I mean, like watching bullshit. Like most of what I watch and I do is I read, you know what I mean? Like I listen to audiobooks and, you know what I mean, I read stuff and I, you know what I mean, watch documentaries like, you know, this channel, whatever, right? Because I'm always been trying to like use it as a tool to become a better person, become better rounded, you know, have an opportunity to gain mentality. I think that's kind of important when it comes down to it.
so it's turned all of us into addicts who are unable to disassociate. The perfect example of this sort of thing is dating apps, which no one really likes, but because people's social networks have become so much smaller, have become necessary. Dating apps play against human psychology since they don't allow any of the physiological parts of courtship. Girls go after hot guys who then ghost them since they haven't built up an impersonal connection, and guys feel like the system is rigged against them since women are inherently pickier than men and men are winnowed down to a single variable of attractiveness, throwing others like charisma, how well dressed you are, and game out the window. Both sexes leave dating apps feeling unfulfilled and lonely, missing out on the human emotional connection. Studies have found that.
And let me say this, man, I think dude standards are entirely too high. Right. Legit. So I just turned up my volume a little bit because I'll be real. Like I was like I feel like it's not quite where it needed to be. So like if I just blasted you in the ears, I apologize. But like legitimately, I think dude standards are entirely too high as far as stuff's really concerned. And I think that females have entirely too many options when it comes to dudes. Right. Like I think there should be, I don't want to say laws, but like rules, right? You know what I mean? Like, I think there should be rules on dating apps where like married or females who are in relationships should not allowed to be on them, right? That way dudes don't have access to them. And just like Facebook, I think Facebook's way worse than any dating app in the end of the day, right? Because like dudes have access to females all the time. And I don't know if you ever seen the females' Facebook page, but the majority of the motherfuckers hanging around are just dudes, right? Waiting to pounce on that pussy. You know what I mean? Like wolves after a hot pack of, you know what I'm saying, wildebeest or something. You know what I mean?
Social media and especially Instagram have had precipitously negative effects on young women. They've found that technology has a far less effect on young men, who largely play video games or watch YouTube videos, which have negligible mental health effects in of themselves. However, for girls, Instagram's a tool for extreme non-stop competition, whether by seeing other girls look more attractive than they really are, thus making them feel bad, or seeing them not be invited to fun social events that makes them feel left out. Young female suicide and depression rates have risen horrifically since the invention of the iPhone. Technology allows us to compare our own lives with people we've never met. The slums of Camden, New Jersey are reminded of Beverly Hills every day, and Dakar, Senegal thinks about London.
Well, let me keep this a buck, right? Because I think this is important right here. You know what I mean? This is the reason why, you know what I'm saying, you have black people losing their shit all over the country, because like they really, They don't understand that the vast majority of normal people live in poverty, right? You know what I'm saying? As compared to like where their parents were. Like they think that, you know what I'm saying? Like all white people live like they do in Beverly Hills or on TV or, you know what I'm saying, on whatever sitcom that they're watching. And it's just not the truth in the end of the day. That's just not how white people live. You know, white people live day to day, paycheck to paycheck, trying to survive like everybody else does for the most part. It's just, you know what I'm saying, like TV just kind of reflects back what the actors and producers of those TV shows really, you know what I mean, how they live. Just want to put that out there.
It also allows political radicals to connect. Incels talk to each other and become mired in their own depression. People read articles of people with similar political opinions rather than reading potentially more balanced regional-focused newspapers. Also, to be fair, people are just so awful and crass online that it spreads negativity in the world in general. People become more politically unhinged than they would be in person, which breeds radicalism and easy demonization of the other side. I think a perfect example of the information revolution and its negative effects are how many of you know more about your favorite newscaster, or maybe even me, people you've never met, than your nearest neighbors. Number 3, lack of beauty. I have lots of qualms with the last century, but the top one is lack of belief in inherent beauty. For example, I would support my home city of Philadelphia spending $500 million on building a gorgeous cathedral to commemorate the city. The thing would last 1,000 years and become a center of pride for the whole city that would honor us by all constructing it.
I'll be real. I would support the United States, you know what I mean, standing here spending, you know what I mean, like a buttload of money, right? Pushing Philadelphia into the Delaware River, right? In the end of the day, right? it's kind of my mentality as far as things go. Like, but you know, I can't stand Philadelphia. You know what I mean? You're like, yo, fuck Cheese Whiz.
However, it would be attacked on the left for spending money that could go towards the poor and being designed with white heteronormative architectural styles, and on the right for taking taxpayer money that could go into the economy. The shared point of view is that there's no civic pride or belief in something more beautiful than our sheer mundane existences. Most of us live in cities, which are ugly, alternating between ugly-looking houses to ugly-looking schools or work and repeat. We drive on ugly roads while doing it. The truth is that until extremely recently, most of us lived in the countryside, and most countrysides, whether the rice paddies of Japan, rolling fields of England, or the sheep pastures of New Zealand, are gorgeous and we feel connected to our environment. Similarly, until recently, houses were built to have character and represent the cultures and the people involved. The architectural style of recent years has been basically breaking down any cultural or geographic boundaries. Buildings are the same whether you're in Japan, South Africa, or New York. Most architecture is basically giant square blocks made out of steel and glass. The architecture says nothing about us and gives us no identity. It's sort of like how you would feel if you only wore black shirts and have no other option in your society.
Well, you have to remember, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's highly important to understand. And this is why, like, I never really liked Thomas Paine as, you know what I'm saying, an intellectual writer. It's because of the fact that, like, the ideology of individuals are that they are citizens of the world and not citizens of a nation or a culture, right? So the people that are building these things aren't connected to a culture. They're not part of a heritage. They're not part of a geographic location. And this is a problem for people, or for our society, right? And all societies, because, like, you know, the human experience, I would hope that this dude would agree with me, is that it's a tapestry, right? It's a quilt. It's not a melting pot, right? It's not a soup. We're not all blended together, right? Like, each of us have our own heritage and our own culture, right? Our own way of thinking. But we're not allowed to have that because the individuals that are running things, you know what I mean, what we would call the cathedral, right? You know, the academics and media, you know what I mean, and the individuals in government all feel as though that everything should be the same. And it should all just be identical, and it should all match how they grew up in New York or Chicago or LA, right? Because they don't have, you know what I'm saying, a really cultural attachment to that. They can leave there and go to Tokyo, or they can leave there and go to Johannesburg. They can leave there and go to, Berlin, right? And they're at home in all these places because of the fact that, you know, they're they're not really attached to things. They're citizens of the world. And this is the problem with the global identity. You know, I mean, the idea of not having borders. This is the problem with it, is that you lose the beauty and the character and the respect of what you are as a people. And that's highly important to understand.
This is an overstatement, but even the best architecture of the present world is completely inhuman and unrelatable. Hagia Sophia fills me with love and pride. A New York skyscraper doesn't do the same. Look at streetwear, the dominant fashion now. Streetwear is basically a competition for how ugly you can look. It comes from designs that lower-class people wore since they couldn't afford anything else. It wears purposely garish colors in order to offend. It's a fashion that exists so people show they aren't trying to be better than you, but people still spend thousands on it to show that they're better than you. We've gone from belief in inherent beauty to just having a lot of dopamine hits. The average pop song now features an attractive, scantily clad girl saying sexually explicit keywords without any context while making a lewd dance and playing a repetitive beat that means to just get your attention forever. This is since in our current capitalist model, people are paid to get people's attention in dollars without any other metric. Thus, the thing that grabs your attention rather than the thing that's good makes money. The problem with the dopamine art world is that music videos make you feel good in the moment, but afterwards, we found from scientific studies that when your dopamine and serotonin goes up really high, it collapses downwards beneath the normal rate. After that music video, you think about how in the real world, a hot pop star doesn't want to sleep with you, which your rational brain would have known the whole time was entirely behind your abilities. The truth is that beautiful things come indirectly from meaning. If you were actually going to sleep with a pop star, you would have derived meaning from the many years it took you to become rich, charismatic, fit, and famous enough to do so. Movies like The Godfather, Lord of the Rings, and American Beauty convey artistic meanings that help explain our own emotional and narrative.
I'm gonna disagree with that, right? Like, The Godfather gives you a peek into somebody else's culture, right? The Lord of the Rings is basically English and Christian heritage. You know what I'm saying, right? Like, all these things are pieces of somebody else's culture that you're getting an opportunity to have a look into. And let's keep it all the way 100 here. The destruction of those cultures are the reasons why, like, you're not getting the movies that you used to get, right? Because, like, you don't have something that's outside of the ordinary because everything has become this cookie cutter box mentality, right? We're gonna get into this stuff here in a little bit. Like, I'll be real. Like, the first half of this video, like, is kind of just whatever for me at the moment. You know what I mean? But, like, in the end, like, the rest of this is gonna be way more, involved.
States to us. The Beatles convey real things besides chemical button pushing. In all fairness, beauty allows us to live far more.
Yo, this is a troll for y'all. Oasis is better than the Beatles.
Meaningful and happy lives than the absence of beauty would. Imagine what your lifestyle would be like if you were in a gorgeous lake in rural Canada next to a giant mountains and forests, compared to living in a single cell, where you had the exact same material conditions but you never saw the sun, the air quality was worse, and there was no beauty around you whatsoever. Number 4, control and monotony. Our lives are extremely boring and predictable. I mean, in a lot of ways, that's a good thing. Life was less predictable in the Middle Ages, but that was because you weren't sure if locusts or drought were going to wipe out your crop or the Lord would draft your son for the crusade. I talked about this before in my video about zombies, but a modern person's life goes something like this. They're born in a regulated hospital and then go to a structured daycare. For kids in many areas and countries, they're not allowed to play outside without parental supervision, and then they go to school at strict times where they studied pre-appointed subjects. They get into a college based off their score in a test that has little relation to the work they'll be doing, and then go to college and it just continues. College today has little to do with free thinking, and they get shoved an ideological agenda there as well. Political correctness basically results in de facto no freedom of speech or thought given to people, as their lives or chance of work can be ruined for saying the wrong things. Afterwards, they work a pre-appointed number of hours with a boss who controls how they work. Their hobbies are more regulated than ever, in that places in like the US, safety culture regulates a lot of possible hobbies. People meet their partner through a dating app algorithm and then get shoved into a retirement home when they're so old as to not slow down the rest of society. This might be a strange thing to say, but with the exception of people like slaves and servants, people were in many ways freer in the pre-industrial world, even in systems like monarchies and empires than they are today. An 18th century peasant could wake up at whatever time they wanted. Their lives were determined by local regulations inside their village rather than external forces. They could brawl in the pub without pissing off the nanny state, educate their kids however they wanted, drink on the job, say whatever they wanted without directly conspiring to rebel, and everything in the world was done with personal relationships with people they knew, rather than with giant impersonal bureaucracies and algorithms that didn't give a damn about them. The industrial world with its complex, interdependent supply chains, the desire for power from bureaucratic governments which became more powerful due to rapid transport and large militaries, has basically worked together to turn people into interchangeable cogs with as little differentiation as possible. This created a modern world that feels deeply sterile, inhuman, and boring. People like to watch movies about the apocalypse, and I think partially lots of people wish it would happen since they're so tired of being so strongly socialized and having everything they do be preparing for the future or working for someone else's goals. The modern complex globalized system is remarkably unstable due to always trying to optimize for connectivity and short-term gain. I find the fact that COVID shut down the world economy and provoked the greatest inflationary period in human history interesting, given that COVID isn't that dangerous a disease. I don't think it even would have registered in the 19th century. Imagine what any real-sized play or war could do.
Motherfucking based.
Number 5. Lack of ideology. One of the things I realized the older I got was really how little clue we have about how we're supposed to act and what we're supposed to be doing. I grew up viewing the world a certain way and assumed there were only a handful of others. However, the more I studied history and traveled, the more I realized how there isn't a right-left binary, a religious-non-religious binary, and the world in general was significantly more complicated than I ever could have imagined. I had always wondered why modern Christianity mucked around in stuff like masturbation, the Trinity, or abortion, which the Bible never covers, and then it occurred to me. In a scary world, we look for answers among the chaos, and since the West is a civilization founded upon Christianity, people turn to reference Christianity on nearly every topic, whether or not the Bible actually cared or did talk about those topics. One of the more horrifying things of the modern world is that this is the first time since the Axial Age, or before the birth of Christ, in which there's no clear value system that the world should follow. Much as it might not seem it, the 20th century was the era of the most intense religious struggle in the history of the world, except those religions all placed man as the dominant force in the universe, whether in the form of communism, fascism, or liberalism. Liberalism won the battle, but even today, it faces fatal attacks whether in the form of authoritarianism in the second or third world, or social justice and right-wing populism in the first. This is caused by a series of problems in liberal philosophy, or the idea that the individual should always be prioritized in society, that I don't have time to talk about, so here's a text wall. Durkheim, the founding scholar of religious philosophy, believed that religions should have 4 characteristics, or metaphysics, like what's our place in the world, ethics, or how do I become a good person, ceremonies, and community. None of our modern ideologies fulfill any of these purposes except metaphysics, and only that barely. Ideologies are like 2-bit versions of religion in complexity. They take single notions and then apply them across all of reality. Take social justice, which takes white men bad to insane extremes of not being able to denounce far worse atrocities in non-white countries, saying cultural mixing is evil, and actively discriminating against other ethnic minorities like Asians and Jews.
All right. Here's where I wanted to come in, right? Because this is important to understand that a lot of people don't know about this because a lot of people never read this because this guy was demonized by the media, but legitimately he sat here and he came out with some really, really good ideologies, some stuff that people really have no idea about. So I'm gonna read this to you. Modern technology, with its rapid long-distance transportation and disruption of traditional ways of life, has led to the mixing of populations, so that nowadays people in different races, nationalities, cultures, and religions have to live and work side by side. If people hate or reject one another on the basis of race, ethnicity, religion, sexual preference, etc., the resulting conflicts interfere with the functioning of the system. Apart from a few old fossilized relics of the past like Jesse Helms, the leader of the system knows this very well, and that's why we're taught in school and through the media to believe that racism, sexism, homophobia, and so forth are social evils to be eliminated. No doubt some of these leaders of the system, some of the politicians, scientists, and CEOs privately feel that a woman's place is in the home, or that homosexuality and interracial marriage are repugnant, but even if the majority of them felt that way, it would not mean that racism, sexism, and homophobia were part of the system. any more than that the existence of the stealing among the leaders means that stealing is part of the system. Just as the system must promote respect for law and property for the sake of its own security, the system must also discourage racism and other forms of victimization for the same reasons. That is why the system, notwithstanding any private deviations by individual members of the elite, basically is committed to suppressing discrimination and victimization, right? And he goes on a little bit later. He says the system needs a population that is meek, nonviolent, domesticated, docile, and obedient. It needs to avoid any conflict or disruption that could interfere with the orderly function of the social machine. In addition to suppressing racial, ethnic, religious, and other group hostilities, it also has to suppress or harness for its own advantage all of the tendencies that could lead to disruption or disorder, such as machismo, aggressive impulses, and any inclination to violence. Right? And many people do not understand the roots of their own frustrations. Hence, their rebellion is directionless. They know that they want to rebel, but they don't know what to rebel against. Luckily, the system is able to fill their need by providing them a list with the standard stereotyped grievances in which to rebel: racism, homophobia, women's issues, poverty, sweatshops, and a whole laundry bag of activist issues. Right? Lastly, so this is what's known as the system's neatest trick. So in a nutshell, for the sake of its own efficiency and security, the system needs to bring about deep, radical social changes to match the changed conditions resulting from technological progress. The frustration of life under the circumstances imposed by the system leads to rebellious impulses. Rebellious impulses are co-opted by the system in the service of social changes. It requires activists rebel against the old, outmoded values that are no longer of use to the system and in favor of new values that the system needs to accept. In this way, rebellious impulses, which otherwise might have been dangerous to the system, are given an outlet that is not only harmless to the system, but also useful to it. And that much of the public's resentment resulting from the imposition of social changes is drawn away from the system and its institutions and is directed instead at the radicals who spearhead the social changes. Now, where does this system exist? This is highly important, right? The system exists in academia. Right. When now we have, like, back in, the 50s and 60s and even before then, you only had like 15, 20, maybe 30% of the population at any given time would actually go to college. Now it's at like 60%. And this is where these ideologies are molded into fashion inside of our system. Right. This is what we call, the cathedral, because it is the part of the system that is basically a ministry of truth outside of our government. And it's actually what runs our government, because these are the individuals who train our government people to stand here and do their jobs. Right? This is important to understand as a whole, right? Legitimately. This is something that, we don't have enough conversations about, because, if you don't recognize it, if you don't see it, right? And it's something that I've been talking about for years, but somebody actually pointed out that, this dude wrote it, and this guy's name was actually Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. Right. Highly interesting stuff. It's just something that, I think that what if Altus, if he understood this, how do I put this? He could find a better way to put it than I do. Right. And explain it to individuals.
On the other side, take Reaganite capitalism, which basically only looks at economics and even so only at GDP growth, ignoring everything else like environment, quality of life, inequality, geopolitics, cultural cohesion, debt, and local politics for short-term GDP growth, which largely accrues to the elite. I remember reading Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life and thinking, this is generally accurate, but it's stuff my dad taught me by age 15. And then I talked to my friends about his conclusions, and I realized not everyone has been taught stuff like take pride in your work or tell the truth even when it hurts his children.
Well, that's because we've ripped the fathers outside of households, right? You have to remember that something like 3/4 of all children at this point grow up, without a father. Right. This is highly important to understand. Right. It's like something like 78% in the black community. It's like 60% in the white community. You have to remember that, we grow up without fathers in our household. So, yeah, most of us have no idea. And this is why these guys are so popular, because men need to have these mentalities taught to them. Right? They have to have some type of purpose put into them. They have to have some type of moral compass and values added to them. And, the fact that we don't have any fathers is, the number one cause of most of the problems in our society.
Sort of horrifying how lost many young people are today. I meet loads of people who think life has no meaning, nothing they do is worthwhile, the world is fundamentally broken, that they're born into guilt, and that they'll die lonely and poor. This isn't what the next generation should be thinking, it should be the thought process of the insides of a mental ward. This is since ideas allow us to transcend the suffering of reality. When the world sucks, the idea of something better drives us forward. However, when people have no direction of what's worthwhile and have no broad ideas on how to act, the world just drags them down. It's crazy how much we take traditional religions for granted. I always find it amusing when I meet atheists and their supposedly rational philosophic views are still deeply grounded in supposedly irrational Christian doctrines. Once you remove the meaning given to us by traditional religions, we're just staring into the black void, and with all that blackness and nothing, we realize how little we are. Number 6. Poor physical health. Obesity has risen precipitously in the modern world. There are now 2 billion obese people around the planet. Obesity is driven heavily by sugar, which is realistically a drug that the whole world and societies are addicted to. Society's addicted to a lot of drugs. Caffeine's an obvious one. Marijuana realistically acts as an opiate for people who can't otherwise handle their lives, and porn is pretty similar. It's interesting to see that at least in the US, health has actively declined. White males live shorter lives, Americans as a whole are fatter, shorter, have less sex, and die of drugs more than before. The declines in sex are important here. Americans and probably other regions around the world are having significantly less sex than in previous decades, probably driven by mobile phones, smaller social networks, and stuff like that. Humans are inherently biological creatures, and our main prime motivators are status and sex, and so when those get weakened, bad things happen. You can actually predict crises happening across history when the marriage rate goes above age 28, since it means society's under an incredible amount of stress. It reminds me of how carriage horses have blinders attached to them so they don't freak out all the street traffic around them. People use drugs to deal with hyper-structured, crowded lives that we didn't evolve for. Remember, almost all of history has been spent in rural tribes, and so imagine how your nerves react to the chaos and confusion of modern cities and the high stimuli modern world.
You know, this is why, like, you know, I did that video the other day, and I was talking about how the suburbs are basically, you know, a nursery, you know what I'm saying, for white people, right? Because, like, the suburbs is how, you know, human beings are actually meant to live as a whole, right? Like, this is how human beings they're supposed to live in small villages and towns. They're supposed to live, you know and have the opportunity to have a household with a family in it, you know that's not attached and stacked on top of each other, where your children can play and be safe and have a community around them that, is safe and gives a shit about them, because that's how human beings are supposed to live, right? They're not supposed to live in cities where it's crowded and it's dangerous and it's dirty and it's polluted and disgusting, right? Like, you're not supposed to live inside of a city. You're supposed to live in a town, right? That's why I live in a town right next to a river, right across the, on the other side of the river is a mountain. And then behind me on the other side is a mountain, right? It's important that, we live in these ways. It's something that we don't discuss enough at all as a society to understand it. Like, we're not supposed to live in giant, cities full of concrete boxes with people stacked inside of them. It's not how human beings are meant to live.
We're sort of trained in the modern West to not see the body and mind being connected due to ancient Greek philosophy, but they totally are. On a personal basis, I've really gotten into fitness in the last couple of months, and I've been doing keto, intermittent fasting, and lifting, and it's improved my mood, concentration, and willpower tremendously. Number 7. Lack of community. There's this fascinating book called Bowling Alone about how your average American social group has shrunk markedly since the 1960s. Bowling, political, church, Boy Scouts, and other groups have seen collapsing attendance. This has come from a combination of factors like rising commute times, people watching more TV, etc. People's need for community is obvious considering we're herd animals, but looking at statistics on loneliness, lack of romantic relationships, and the like, it shows that we're really not doing a good job with this. The incels are really fascinating here. This is a political movement explicitly designed around not getting laid, which comes partially from lack of social communities for these guys to meet girls, but also from not having communities on how to socialize them to prepare them for courtship. School shooters are a similar category of people who feel lonely and impotent against the world. They aren't socialized in how to deal with society, and society is less powerful, so they fall through the cracks and become vengeful and murderous.
Okay, no. Right. This is another part of this that I really wanted to push back on, because, like, Oh man, this is way, way wrong. Way, way, way wrong. Okay, so there's two factors that actually affect school shooters, right? Number one is, all of them, were raised in a single mother household, right? And then number two is the fact that, it's prohibition, okay? When you prohibit anything inside of a society, right? You immediately what you're doing is you're bringing a man with a badge and a gun into the conversation, right? When you do it with alcohol, you ended up, with the mobs and, Chicago and, the mafia and all these things, right? When you did it with drugs, you ended up with drug cartels and gang violence and shootings all over the place. When you did it with child support, right? Where you stood here and said, you're going to have a job and you're going to take care of your kids. And, if you don't, then, you're going to go to jail. You turned an entire, society full of, black fathers who ended up losing their jobs during deindustrialization into, basically feral animals that they're out here shooting and killing each other in gangs, right? And it's the same thing with school shooters, because with school shooters, what used to happen is you got into a brawl, right? And you knocked somebody out or somebody knocked you out. But in the end of the day, the conflict was resolved physically, right? You made that illegal. Anytime some kid pushes or yells or raises his voice inside of a school, you call a man with a badge and a gun into the conversation. So you're immediately turning this conversation from one of which is, ultimately a physical aspect where, human beings and children and teenagers are going to brawl, with higher level of testosterone and things of this nature during adolescence. Right. To establish, the order of, social guidelines and things of this nature into I'm going to go shoot somebody because I don't want to have a man with a badge and a gun drag me off and throw me into a cage. Right. I'd much rather shoot this individual. And we've done this with our laws about anti-bullying and zero tolerance for violence in our schools. This is where this comes from. It is not right about incel movements or anything of this nature, right? It is a lack thereof of fathership. It's a lack thereof, and it's an over aggressive government standing here trying to dictate how individuals socialize inside of a basic school that you're forced to go to every day. So it is what it is. This is a completely wrong mentality. I have to put this in here. Right? Because it's wrong on a level that, makes everybody else worse for hearing these words that he said.
People like to think that communications via screens would equal interpersonal communication. However, we've all been through COVID and know this isn't true, and that this is a major mistake in the social structuring of the last couple decades. So we've gone through all the reasons I think lead to unhappiness in the modern world. Now, before we end, let's briefly roll through some of the historic factors that I think lead to where we are. Explanation 1. Early industrialization. The easiest and best explanation is that we're in the early stages of the industrial world. The Industrial Revolution happened 200 years ago, and in almost all the world it's been significantly more recent than that. This means that we have very little idea on how to happily manage industrialized societies. For a comparison, it took thousands upon thousands of years for societies to be able to fully adapt to the previous agricultural revolution. If we look at all the political and philosophic debates going on now, they're primarily driven by trying to figure out the boundaries given to us by industrialization. The transgender debate, for example, is about if technology has transcended gender, and the immigration one turns out to be has the modern world transcended the ethnic group. Most of this is driven by the Industrial Revolution, with lots clustering around complications living around schedules in cities and with women in the workforce. We built our societies for utility first and everything else second, which resulted in the lack of beauty and lack of community. Women as housewives are the main pillars of community, and their entrance to the workforce, for all its benefits, did weaken it. Similarly, lots of poor health is driven by people eating out more without housewives cooking. This isn't just the industrialized world either. In places like Africa, which never saw the Industrial Revolution, there's this thing called anomie, in which the tribal social constructs and boundaries of thousands of years have been ripped apart by the introduction of capitalism in large cities, which results in high crime, disaffection, and not knowing how society works. The information revolution has similarly thrown us a lot of curveballs that we don't know how to do.
All right. So let's have the rest of this conversation, right? Because I think it's kind of important, right? Because I'm going to give a solution about this. All right. There are three types of people, right? There are city folks, right? Yeomen, individuals who, are, townies, as we would call them, right? and deracinated people, right? Gang members, things of this nature, Native American gang members, mafia individuals, people, Chinese mafia, whatever the case is, right? Issue is that everybody is being ran by this guy, right? And this guy here is in college, and this guy here is the individual who's actually, dictating how things operate to individuals, who are absolutely nothing like him, right? This guy here is the individual, who is, the most normal in all of the situation, right? This guy here is who should not be ruled by, this dude. This is the problem. Right? This dude needs to shut the fuck up, and do what he does and make his money and not try to dictate, to everybody else. Problem is that, this dude here has no energy to go and, try and actually make political decisions. You see what happened on January 6th? Individuals tried to ramshack the House of Congress without any weapons, And then they called it an insurrection. It wasn't even barely a riot in the end of the day, right? And then, Baked Alaska tried to beat a dude half to death with a fire extinguisher. It is what it is. You got to be careful. That Baked Alaska guy, last time he was at a rally, he ended up running over some chick in a Dodge Charger, like, But this is the reality of things, right? Everybody, for the most part, should be trying to be pushed to be more like this guy, right? Not Homer Simpson himself, but, more like a towny individual. Everybody normally lives in that type of situation because that's the natural state of man, right? Is to live inside of a town with your family and your children, and, you go and you earn a living every day, whether you work or whether, you till the land or whether you hunt and gather, there's no fucking difference. All right, you dictate a certain amount of your day to providing for your family, and you come home and you have authority over that family. The reasons why, and this is another problem with what if altist, mentality is that, look, women, the reason why women have such a problem inside of this society and why our society is so destroyed is just because we put them in the workforce, right? It absolutely is the truth. But the reasons why they went into the workforce is because of the washing machine, right? And because of the vacuum cleaner and because of the refrigerator and because of running water and because of plumbing, right? It used to be a woman spent her day taking care of the household, and that was her job, right? Not out here running the vacuum cleaner, because that was the issue, is that, females at home had, it took them 45 minutes to do their chores every day, and then, they had nothing else to do, right? This is the problem, is that right now they have nothing to do in the household the majority of the day, especially once children get past the age of toddlers, right? When children are toddlers, they require a lot of activity and a lot of, intense having to pay attention to them, right? Tends to be how it works. But the problem is that when a female is a housewife now, she has literally nothing to do but figure out ways to bitch and try to fulfill herself, and she has no way to do so, right? Especially inside of these suburban neighborhoods that we set up, like old villages. And yes, we try to pack as many people into them as possible because we try to be efficient, because land is expensive, property is expensive, maintaining plumbing and facilities and things for everybody is expensive. All these things are highly expensive. Roads and bridges and all the things that, are involved inside of a suburb is expensive stuff. So, what is the answer? Extreme restrictions. On social media, extreme restrictions on females. Because if you don't put females back in a place where they belong, our society is just going to disintegrate and be destroyed. That's all there is to it. And by restricting females, you are already restricting males, right? If you're taking away males' ability to get a hold of females on Facebook or, Tinder, whatever it is, once a female's married, she should not have access, right, to things like the internet, right? She should not have access to any programs, that are going to stand here and tell her that she is unhappy, because it is better for the family and everybody involved if she is happy. That's kind of the point. Even if you do it through the state of, really restricting what happens, because it's the only way to maintain society. It doesn't matter whether or not you think it's right or wrong, right? Morally, that's not the fucking point. The point is what's good for the overall majority of society, right? It's a basic premise, because the idea that work equals freedom is what was written over the gates at Auschwitz. It's not a true thing. Dudes go to work because they have to. If I had my choice, I'd be outside fishing every day with my children and spending time at home with the family rather than having to go to work every day. But anyway, yo, look, I'm going to go eat. It is what it is. Hope y'all enjoyed this video. You know what it is. Like, share, and subscribe. Peace.